In a significant development, Niger made headlines in March 2024 as the first African country to terminate its military cooperation with the United States. Presently, U.S. officials are engaged in negotiations with Niger's military government in an attempt to secure the continuation of their forces and base in the country. The outcome of these negotiations remains uncertain, leaving the United States increasingly aware of its declining influence not only in the Sahel region, but also across Africa. Despite this waning influence, the United States is reluctant to sever ties completely and is actively seeking to align with certain African leaders. Recently, U.S. military commandos visited Equatorial Guinea, a country located in Central Africa, to strengthen relations with the government, which is known for its corruption, human rights abuses, and repressive policies. It is important to note that this visit was not a mere sightseeing tour, but rather a mission to deliver humanitarian aid and financial assistance from the United States government to President Teodoro Obiang Nguema Mbasogo, who has held power for over 6 decades. The aid provided to Equatorial Guinea represents the latest endeavor by the United States to court President Teodoro. Following the donation of humanitarian aid, Commander Michael White, the defense attaché to the U.S. Embassy in Equatorial Guinea, expressed hope that this gesture would initiate further cooperation. Similarly, U.S. Ambassador to Equatorial Guinea, David Gilmour, voiced optimism that the recent contribution of medical supplies would be the first of many opportunities for collaboration with the country's government. While engagement between the United States and Equatorial Guinea may appear normal on the surface, considering that countries often seek to establish connections, it raises concerns due to the stark contradiction with America's purported values of democracy, human rights, and anti-corruption. The willingness of the United States to collaborate with a regime that embodies the opposite of these principles solely to maintain a military presence in Africa exposes its hypocrisy to the world. Now let's delve into the oppressive and corrupt regime of President Teodoro while examining the background of Equatorial Guinea. For those unfamiliar with the country, Equatorial Guinea is the third smallest nation in Africa, with a population of approximately 6 million people. Like many African countries, Equatorial Guinea is rich in resources, including oil. Interestingly, this small Central African nation stands as one of the most prosperous countries on the continent, ranking 31st in the world in terms of GDP and 9th in Africa in the Human Development Index. However, despite these economic indicators, 70% of the country's population lives below the poverty line. The immense wealth, which could more than adequately support less than 2 million people, is concentrated within the government and the country's elite. The root of this issue lies with President Teodoro Obiang, who has been the country's uncontested ruler since orchestrating a bloody coup against his uncle, Francisco Matias Nguema, who ruled with an iron fist following the nation's independence from Spain in 1968. Under Matias' regime, Equatorial Guinea witnessed widespread suppression, purges, and killings. It is estimated that a third of the population either lost their lives or went into exile during this period. Matias' rule is widely recognized as one of the most brutal and oppressive in history. Teodoro initially appeared comparatively more humane during his early years in power. However, as time passed, his regime grew increasingly ruthless and authoritarian. While Equatorial Guinea claims to be a democracy, the reality is that President Teodoro holds absolute control over the country. Opposition parties exist, but it is widely acknowledged that the president wields all governing power. Every election held in the country has been manipulated and rigged to ensure Teodoro remains in office. Human rights reports shed light on extrajudicial killings, torture, inhumane punishments, arbitrary arrests, and political imprisonment carried out by the state. Furthermore, corruption permeates all levels of the government, particularly at the highest echelons. Despite the country's abundant wealth, President Teodoro and his inner circle continue to amass personal fortunes through monopolies on domestic commercial ventures, as well as timber and oil exports. This high-level corruption remains a significant concern, as the country's resources should be utilized for the benefit of the entire population rather than being exploited for personal gain. However, the case was eventually closed after Teodoro surrendered approximately $30 million in assets to the United States. In subsequent years, both the French and American governments seized numerous assets from Obiang and his son, including mansions, valuable wine collections, and high-end sports cars. Swiss prosecutors, for instance, took possession of 11 luxury cars belonging to Teodoro in 2016, which included Lamborghinis, Ferraris, Bentleys, a Bugatti, and a Rolls-Royce. In 2021, France further seized $170 million worth of Teodoro's assets, including a grand 101-room mansion near the Arc de Triomphe in Paris. Despite these asset seizures, Teodoro's extravagant lifestyle remains unaffected. He continues to spend millions of dollars on a life of luxury while simultaneously appealing to the United Nations for aid, all because of his position as Vice President of Equatorial Guinea. Yes, you heard it correctly. President Obiang appointed his son, who is known for his penchant for opulence, as the Vice President of the country. This move is seen by many as President Obiang grooming his son to assume power whenever he decides to step down from the presidency. Despite the glaring corruption, oppression, and lack of democratic values exhibited by President Teodoro Obiang's regime, the United States has chosen to turn a blind eye and seek a partnership with Equatorial Guinea. However, it is rather ironic that the same country, the United States, has dispatched its top officials to Niger with a specific demand. They insist that Niger must transition from military rule to civilian governance through a democratic election and refrain from forming alliances with undemocratic countries like Russia and China. This apparent hypocrisy raises questions about the consistency of their principles. This is not the first instance where the United States has prioritized its interests over its proclaimed values of democracy and human rights. It seems that democracy and human rights are only practiced when they align with the United States' own objectives. Presently, countering the influence of China and Russia in Central Africa is a priority for the United States. In 2022, reports emerged indicating that China intended to establish a military base in Equatorial Guinea. Since then, the United States has been actively seeking to win over the president of Equatorial Guinea to prevent this and ensure that the only military base in the country is under U.S. control. In February, the U.S. Army made a donation worth $24,000 in supplies, including baby formula and first aid kits, to Equatorial Guinea. The Army released a statement highlighting their collaboration with the Equatorial Guinea government to facilitate this engagement, emphasizing the ongoing relationship between the two nations. What is surprising, however, is the need for such a donation, as if Equatorial Guinea were in the midst of a war, when in reality, the country is so wealthy that its president has a personal fortune estimated at $600 million. This engagement between the United States and the presidency of Equatorial Guinea further demonstrates the inconsistency of the United States' claim to be a defender of human rights and democracy. One could argue that the United States, as a superpower, has been one of the biggest violators of human rights in history, yet it faces minimal repercussions due to its global influence. One can only hope that someday this pattern will change, and genuine respect for human rights and democracy will prevail. We invite you to share your thoughts on this matter in the comments section below. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share this article for more updates.